The sun was just beginning to rise over the dusty plains when the lone cowboy rode into the small clearing. He had been traveling for days, the harsh wind of the open land whipping against his face, leaving traces of fatigue and determination. His horse, though tired, moved steadily, guided by the quiet understanding shared between man and animal. The cowboy had lived much of his life alone, wandering from town to town, from one settlement to another. People often whispered about him, calling him a man of few words, a man with a mysterious past, but none truly knew the depth of his loneliness or the stories etched into the lines of his weathered face. He arrived near the outskirts of a small Apache settlement, a place both beautiful and dangerous. The land was rich with history, its soil carrying the echoes of generations that had lived and fought there. The cowboy knew little of the people who called it home, but he had learned to respect their ways, understanding that trust could not be demanded, it had to be earned. As he dismounted and led his horse toward a nearby stream, he noticed a figure moving in the distance. At first, he thought it was someone tending to their daily chores, but as he approached, he realized it was a woman, not just any woman, but someone whose presence carried strength and quiet authority. She moved with purpose, her gaze steady, her movements precise. There was something in her demeanor that immediately commanded respect. She was an Apache widow, known among her people for her resilience and dignity, having endured loss yet carrying herself with unwavering grace. The cowboy paused, unsure whether to speak or to remain silent. The widow noticed him as well, her eyes briefly meeting his before she returned to her work. She was cautious, as anyone would be when confronted with a stranger, especially a man with a reputation that preceded him. Her life had changed dramatically over the past year. She had lost her husband, a brave and kind man, leaving her with the responsibilities of managing her household, guiding her family, and maintaining the fragile balance of life in the settlement. Despite her grief, she carried herself with quiet strength, knowing that every day required courage, even in the smallest of tasks. She had learned to live with sorrow without letting it define her, and she had learned to observe strangers carefully before allowing trust to take root. For days, the cowboy lingered near the settlement, not out of intrusion but out of necessity. He had business to attend to, and the region provided opportunities for trade and work. Yet, he could not help but notice the widow from a distance. There was something compelling about the way she handled herself, the way she interacted with the few people around her. Always firm, but never harsh. Always present, but never imposing. He admired her quiet strength, a reflection of his own resilience. And perhaps that was why he felt an unspoken connection, even before a word was exchanged. Their first encounter came unexpectedly. The cowboy was crossing a narrow path when the widow appeared suddenly, her horse grazing nearby. Neither spoke at first. Words felt unnecessary, even risky. Instead, they regarded each other with curiosity and caution. He noticed the fine details, the way she held herself, the subtle gestures that revealed both sadness and determination. She noticed him too, the weathered look of a man who had seen too much, carrying the kind of weariness that only solitude and hardship could bring. There was a mutual understanding, though neither spoke it aloud. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than words, and in that moment, silence was enough to acknowledge their presence in each other's lives. As days turned into weeks, their paths crossed more frequently. The cowboy would see her tending to the small garden near her home, repairing fences, or guiding younger members of her family. Each time, he found himself observing quietly, careful not to intrude, but drawn irresistibly to her determination and resilience. For her part, the widow began to notice the man's quiet acts of kindness. He would leave small gifts of food, repair broken tools, or simply be present when help was needed. There was no showmanship in his actions, no desire for recognition, only genuine care and competence. Slowly, she began to lower her guard, recognizing a kindred spirit in this stranger, who seemed to understand the value of hard work, patience, and respect. The community around them started to notice the unusual pairing. Whispers circulated, though few dared to approach the subject openly. The widow's strength and independence had always been admired, and now it seemed that her path had crossed with someone equally solitary and strong-willed. Yet, Despite the quiet attention of onlookers, both remained focused on the tasks at hand. They understood that trust was delicate, easily broken, and that the bond forming between them was fragile and unspoken. Their connection was built not on words, but on shared glances, mutual respect, and the silent understanding that life had not been easy for either of them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold, the cowboy found himself sitting near the stream where they had first noticed each other. The widow was nearby, gathering water in a bucket, her movements calm and steady. The air was filled with the gentle sounds of the wilderness, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of birds returning to their nests, and the soft trickle of water. There was a sense of peace in that moment, a fleeting tranquility that both had grown to cherish. It was in these quiet moments that the foundations of trust were laid, invisible yet unbreakable, shaping the path of their relationship without the need for words. Their interactions, though simple, were profound. The cowboy learned to anticipate her needs without being asked, offering assistance in ways that were helpful but never intrusive. She, in turn, began to observe him more closely, noticing the small gestures that revealed his character, a careful placement of tools, a respectful distance, a readiness to act without being commanded. Through these everyday acts, a subtle bond formed, unspoken yet undeniable. Each day brought new opportunities to understand one another, to navigate the uncharted territory of two lives slowly intertwining. As the season changed, the cowboy and the widow faced the realities of the land together. Harsh weather, unpredictable terrain, and occasional threats from the wider world required cooperation and vigilance. They discovered that reliance on one another was not a sign of weakness but of strength. Together, they learned that survival depended not just on individual skill, but on mutual respect and understanding. This realization brought them closer, allowing a quiet companionship to grow. One built on trust, shared experiences, and the recognition that both had endured hardships that shaped their hearts and minds. Despite the growing connection, both remained cautious. The widow, mindful of her cultural heritage and personal loss, kept her feelings guarded. She knew that opening her heart carried risks. Yet she could not deny the subtle pull she felt toward this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly. The cowboy, too, wrestled with his emotions, aware of the fragile line between respect and desire. He had spent years shielding himself from attachments, believing that solitude was safer than vulnerability. Yet, in her presence, he found a sense of peace he had not known for years, a feeling that perhaps life could offer companionship without compromise. By the time the first frost touched the plains, their bond had deepened into something neither fully understood but both respected. They shared moments of laughter and quiet reflection, unburdened by the need for words. They helped each other through challenges, each act of support reinforcing the connection between them. It was in these shared experiences that the seeds of trust and understanding took root, laying the groundwork for a relationship that promised more than mere acquaintance. The cowboy and the widow had discovered a rare and fragile connection, one built not on fleeting attraction, but on enduring respect and shared resilience. In the evenings, they would sometimes sit apart, yet near enough to share the silence, each lost in thoughts, yet aware of the other's presence. The world beyond the settlement seemed distant, its dangers and distractions muted by the simple reality of survival and companionship. In those moments, the weight of loneliness that had once defined their lives began to lift, replaced by the quiet knowledge that they were no longer entirely alone. Though neither spoke of love or desire, the bond between them was unmistakable, carried in glances, gestures, and the unspoken acknowledgement of each other's strength. By the end of Part 1, the cowboy and the Apache widow had established a foundation of trust, understanding, and mutual respect. Their story was only beginning, shaped by shared hardships, quiet moments, and the slow, steady recognition of the extraordinary in the ordinary. They were two souls, each marked by loss and experience, finding solace in the presence of one another. And though the path ahead was uncertain, the beginning of their connection promised a journey defined by honesty, courage, and the unspoken possibility of something deeper. The days following their quiet understanding were filled with both routine and unexpected challenges. The cowboy and the Apache widow had settled into a rhythm, though neither could have called it predictable. Each morning began before sunrise. The cowboy would tend to his horse, checking its health and grooming it carefully. Meanwhile, the widow would prepare her small home, making sure everything was in order for the day ahead. Their tasks were separate yet intertwined, as if the land itself had drawn them into a shared purpose. One morning, as frost lingered on the ground and the air bit at exposed skin, the cowboy noticed that some of the fences near the fields had been damaged. Wolves or wild dogs had likely been responsible. Without hesitation, he began repairing the wooden rails, hammering in stakes, and reinforcing the structure. The widow appeared silently, carrying bundles of wood. She had been watching him from a distance and had known that his efforts could use assistance. Together, they worked efficiently, exchanging no words beyond what was necessary. Their hands moved with purpose, understanding each other without needing to speak, each respecting the skill and effort of the other. During the task, the widow finally spoke, her voice calm but carrying authority. "You work well," she said, eyes fixed on the fence. "But you must be careful. The ground is frozen. One wrong step could hurt you." The cowboy nodded without looking up, appreciating her concern more than her words. It was not flattery he sought, but recognition of the dangers that surrounded them. In return, he glanced at her, noting the strength in her posture and the way she handled the wood with ease. She was not fragile, as some might have assumed from her status as a widow. She was a woman who carried responsibility and loss, yet faced life with unwavering courage. As they continued, a young boy from the settlement approached, carrying a message from one of the elders. A herd of cattle had wandered too far from the nearby valley, and there was concern they might be lost. Without waiting for instructions, the cowboy grabbed a rope and gestured to the widow to join him. She did so immediately, demonstrating both confidence and decisiveness. Together, they rode toward the distant hills, the morning light casting long shadows across the plains. Their movements were synchronized, an unspoken trust guiding them as they worked to gather the animals and bring them safely back to the settlement. The task took hours, testing their endurance and patience. The wind had picked up, carrying dust and the faint smell of the wilderness. The cowboy and the widow rode side by side, shouting to the cattle, guiding them through rough terrain and over uneven ground. At one point, a frightened steer broke away, heading toward a narrow ravine. The widow reacted instinctively, blocking its path with her horse, while the cowboy carefully approached from the other side. Together, they managed to calm the animal, directing it back to the herd. The moment was fleeting, yet it revealed the depth of their ability to rely on one another. Words could not describe the respect that had formed between them. It existed in glances, actions, and shared understanding. By the time the sun reached its highest point, the herd was secure. The cowboy and the widow, though exhausted, felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. They had faced the challenge together, and their cooperation had proven successful. As they returned to the settlement, the widow spoke more openly than she had before. "You are not like other men," she said softly. "You do not rush, nor do you speak without reason. I have seen few like you." The cowboy, unused to compliments or deep observations, felt a strange warmth in his chest. He knew she had suffered much, and for her to notice him in such a way was significant. It was more than admiration, it was acknowledgement of character, and it struck a chord deep within him. In the following days, they faced other trials. A storm had approached the plains, bringing heavy rain and strong winds. The settlement's small structures were at risk, and both knew that preparation was essential. Together, they reinforced walls, secured supplies, and ensured that the animals had shelter. During these long hours, the cowboy observed the widow as she moved calmly among the chaos, directing others with quiet authority and making decisions that balanced care with practicality. He admired her not just for her ability to lead, but for the compassion with which she treated everyone around her. In the midst of adversity, she remained steady, and that steadiness inspired him. As the storm raged through the night, the two found themselves sharing a small space near the hearth. The warmth of the fire was a comfort, and the sound of rain hitting the roof outside created a cocoon of safety. For the first time, words came easier than before. They shared stories, not of grand adventures or heroic deeds, but of simple memories that shaped who they were. The cowboy spoke of years spent traveling alone, learning to survive in a world that often seemed indifferent. The widow spoke of her life before loss, of love and hardship intertwined, and the lessons she had learned through patience and courage. Each story revealed pieces of themselves, carefully, cautiously, like flowers opening to the sun. Their connection deepened not only through shared work and danger, but through these moments of honesty. The cowboy realized that while he had been a stranger in this land, he had found someone whose presence eased the weight of solitude. The widow, in turn, recognized that this man, who seemed reserved and distant, was capable of empathy, understanding, and quiet strength. Neither of them spoke of desire, nor did they act on impulse. Their bond was formed from mutual respect, a recognition of shared struggles, and the unspoken understanding that true companionship required patience and trust. Even in moments of peace, challenges arose. Some neighbors expressed concern about the closeness developing between the two. In a world bound by tradition, an outsider and a widow could draw attention, sometimes disapproval. The widow faced these judgments with quiet dignity, never allowing them to dictate her actions, but acknowledging the reality of the world around her. The cowboy, aware of these pressures, respected her autonomy and reinforced her independence, never seeking to dominate or influence her decisions. Their interactions were equal, each understanding the value of mutual respect over pride or societal expectation. Over time, small acts of care became routine. The cowboy would bring fresh water to the widow's home when he noticed the supply running low. She would offer him a simple meal or guidance on navigating the terrain. These gestures, seemingly ordinary, held extraordinary significance. They reflected understanding, attentiveness, and a growing emotional bond that neither dared to name aloud. Their connection was not built on words or declarations, but on consistency, respect, and shared experiences that created a foundation stronger than any spoken vow. The quiet strength of their relationship became evident during a small crisis. A fire broke out near the edge of the settlement, likely caused by lightning striking dry brush. The cowboy and the widow were among the first to respond, guiding neighbors, moving animals, and controlling the flames. Their coordinated efforts saved property and livestock, and once the danger passed, the settlement recognized their courage and leadership. Yet, for them, the act was less about recognition and more about responsibility and shared duty. They worked not for praise, but because they understood that life demanded action, and that together they were more capable than alone. As the weeks passed, they continued to learn about each other in subtle ways. The cowboy noticed her patience with the young children, her ability to teach without scolding, and her quiet determination to preserve her family's well-being. The widow, in turn, observed the cowboy's calm demeanor in the face of challenges, his attentiveness to the land, and his respect for life, both human and animal. Each new observation strengthened the bond between them, creating a relationship built on admiration, trust, and growing understanding. In quieter moments, they would sometimes find themselves near the river, watching the water flow over smooth stones. They did not speak much, yet the presence of the other was comforting. The cowboy realized that he had not felt this sense of connection in years, and the widow felt a warmth she had thought was lost to her after her husband's passing. These moments were delicate, fragile, and precious, yet they carried the weight of significance. In silence, they communicated more than words ever could, understanding the mutual respect and unspoken affection that had taken root between them. By the end of Part 2, the cowboy and the Apache widow had developed a strong bond. It was a connection forged through shared labor, challenges, and quiet understanding. They trusted one another, relied on each other, and found comfort in their companionship. There was an undeniable emotional connection, yet both maintained respect for boundaries, cultural traditions, and personal grief. Their relationship was no longer merely one of mutual observation. It had grown into a deep and meaningful bond, laying the foundation for the inevitable confrontation with truth, desire, and choice that would shape the next stage of their story. The evening had settled quietly over the plains, the sky painted with deep shades of orange, pink, and purple, as the sun slowly disappeared behind the distant hills. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of earth and grass, a reminder that night was approaching and that the world around them was slowing down. The cowboy had spent the day tending to his horse, checking fences, and preparing for the small tasks that awaited him tomorrow. Yet, he could not ignore the sense of anticipation that hung in the air, a quiet tension that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Something was different tonight. He felt it in the stillness, in the way the shadows lengthened across the land, and in the way the widow's presence seemed to hold a weight he had not felt before. The widow had been watching him from the doorway of her home, her thoughts as restless as the wind. She had spent countless days observing him, learning about him, and understanding his habits and mannerisms. She admired him for his quiet strength, his patience, and the respect he showed to everyone and everything around him. Yet, there had been a growing question in her heart, one she could no longer ignore. She had been lonely for so long, carrying the pain of loss and the responsibilities that had been thrust upon her. She had managed to live with dignity and strength, yet there was a desire she had not allowed herself to speak aloud, a longing for connection, for honesty, for someone to see her not just as a widow, but as a woman with emotions, hopes, and fears. As night fell, she decided that waiting any longer would do nothing but prolong the uncertainty. She approached him quietly, her footsteps soft against the earth, and stopped a few feet away. The firelight from the small hearth inside her home flickered across her face, revealing eyes that held both courage and vulnerability. The cowboy noticed her immediately, sensing that something important was about to unfold. He straightened, his instincts alert, yet he did not speak. He had come to understand that there were moments when words were unnecessary, when the weight of silence carried more meaning than speech. Tonight was one of those moments. The widow took a deep breath, steadying herself, and spoke in a calm but firm voice. "Tell me the truth," she began, her eyes searching his. "Do you desire me too?" Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of her fears, her curiosity, and the hope that he might feel the same connection she had come to recognize. It was a question she had wrestled with in her mind for days, wondering if she had misread the quiet gestures, the small acts of kindness, and the moments of shared understanding. Now, she demanded honesty, not just from him, but from herself. The cowboy was silent for a moment, caught off guard by the directness of her words. He had long avoided conversations about desire or emotion, believing that solitude was safer than vulnerability. Yet, in her presence, he realized that avoiding the truth would not bring peace. He looked into her eyes, seeing the courage it had taken for her to speak, and he knew that honesty was the only path forward. Slowly, carefully, he responded, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I do," he said simply. "I have tried to ignore it, tried to keep my distance, but I cannot. I respect you, and I admire your strength. And yes, I feel a connection I cannot deny." Her eyes widened slightly, not in surprise, but in relief. She had feared rejection, feared that the feelings she had developed were one-sided, yet his words confirmed what she had hoped. There was a pause, a shared silence, in which both seemed to absorb the weight of their confession. It was not a moment of impulsive passion, nor was it filled with dramatic declarations. It was quiet, honest, and profoundly human, a recognition that two people, each shaped by life's hardships, had found understanding and desire in one another. The night air seemed to grow warmer, the tension easing as the honesty between them broke through years of guarded hearts. They spoke of their fears, their pasts, and the obstacles that had shaped their lives. The widow shared memories of her husband, not to dwell on loss, but to honor the life she had lived and the lessons she had learned. The cowboy spoke of years spent wandering alone, of battles faced, and of the loneliness that had become his companion. In sharing these truths, they found not only connection, but a sense of freedom. The honesty between them became a bridge, linking two hearts that had long been cautious and protected. As the night deepened, they walked together along the edge of the clearing, the soft crunch of earth beneath their feet the only sound accompanying their conversation. They discussed the challenges of blending their lives, understanding that their bond would not be free of obstacles. Cultural expectations, past wounds, and the unpredictability of the world around them were all realities they could not ignore. Yet, in acknowledging these truths, they found a sense of partnership that was stronger than fear. Each knew that the journey ahead would require patience, compromise, and courage, but also that it could be rewarding beyond measure. The widow stopped, turning to face him fully. Her voice was steady, yet gentle. "I have waited long for honesty," she said, "and now that I have it, I must ask, can we truly walk this path together? With respect and understanding, knowing that it will not always be easy." The cowboy looked at her, sensing the depth of her vulnerability and the trust she had placed in him. He took a moment, considering not only his own desires but the responsibility that came with them. "Yes," he said finally, "I will walk with you. I cannot promise it will be simple, but I can promise honesty, respect, and that I will stand by you as best I can." A sense of calm settled over them, a quiet understanding that the conversation had changed everything. They were no longer merely companions or neighbors. They had crossed a threshold into mutual recognition of emotion, desire, and shared responsibility. The night around them seemed to reflect their new reality. With stars shining brightly above, the world silent and attentive, as if it, too, acknowledged the honesty that had been spoken. There was no rush, no dramatic gestures, only the gentle acceptance of truth and the promise of what could come. As the hours passed, they returned to the small home, sitting near the hearth where the fire cast dancing shadows across the walls. They spoke less now, allowing the silence to carry meaning. In that quiet, they found comfort in each other's presence, understanding that connection was more than words. It was trust, respect, and shared experience. They laughed softly at memories, shared hopes for the future, and occasionally touched hands in fleeting gestures that communicated what words could not. Every glance, every movement, reinforced the honesty that had been spoken, creating a bond that was unshakable in its simplicity and truth. The night also brought reflection. Each considered the path that had led them here. The widow thought of her loss, her solitude, and the strength that had kept her moving forward. She realized that desire and emotional connection were not betrayals of her past, but natural steps in her journey of healing. The cowboy reflected on the years he had spent wandering, the walls he had built around himself, and the courage it had taken to allow someone in. Both recognized that vulnerability was not weakness, but a necessary part of living fully and authentically. Outside, the world continued in quiet. The gentle rustle of leaves and the distant call of nocturnal creatures, creating a serene backdrop. Yet, within that small space, a transformation had taken place. Two souls, each hardened by experience and loss, had confronted truth and emerged closer than ever. Their bond was no longer tentative or cautious. It was grounded in honesty, respect, and a shared understanding of the complexities of life and desire. They had faced the night together, not as strangers, but as equals willing to navigate the uncertain path of emotion and connection. As dawn approached, the first light of morning crept over the horizon, signaling the end of a night filled with honesty and revelation. The cowboy and the widow, though exhausted, felt a sense of renewal. They had faced difficult truths, shared their fears and desires, and emerged with clarity. There was still much to learn about each other, and challenges awaited them. But for the first time, both felt the possibility of a future shaped by mutual respect, understanding, and the unspoken promise of something deeper. By the end of Part 3, the foundation had been laid for the next stage of their story. They had confronted their emotions, acknowledged their desires, and established a level of honesty that could withstand the tests of time and circumstance. The night had changed them, transforming their relationship from cautious companionship into something filled with potential and hope. And though the journey ahead remained uncertain, both were ready to walk it together, grounded in the truth they had spoken and the trust they had built. The morning after their night of honest confession dawned quietly over the plains, the sun spilling warm light across the earth. The cowboy awoke before the widow, sitting outside his horse in the soft morning glow. He felt a strange calmness in the air, a sense that everything had shifted in ways he could not yet fully name. The night had changed everything. And yet, the responsibilities of life remained. Work awaited, animals needed tending, and the land demanded care. But for the first time in many years, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond survival. It was a purpose connected to trust, companionship, and shared life. The widow stepped outside shortly after, carrying a small bundle of herbs she had gathered from the nearby fields. She paused when she saw him, standing quietly, a faint smile touching her lips. There was no need for words at that moment. The silence between them carried more meaning than any conversation could. They understood that their connection was real, built not on fleeting attraction, but on honesty, respect, and the countless hours of shared effort that had brought them to this point. In that quiet morning light, they both felt the weight of possibility, the promise of something new forming gently between them. The day unfolded with the usual tasks, yet there was a noticeable difference in the energy between them. As they worked side by side, tending to the animals, repairing fences, and preparing meals, there was a subtle ease in their interactions. They moved in harmony, anticipating each other's needs without asking, sharing smiles and small gestures of care. The cowboy would pass her tools without speaking, and she would acknowledge his effort with a nod or a glance that spoke volumes. These small moments reinforced the bond that had been forged through honesty, trust, and shared experience. As they worked, they also spoke more openly about their future. The widow, her voice calm but thoughtful, expressed her hopes for stability, security, and the chance to live fully once more. She spoke of the importance of family, of community, and of the life she wished to build, not just for herself, but for those she cared for. The cowboy listened attentively, offering insight from his own experiences, the lessons he had learned from a life spent navigating challenges and loneliness. Together, they began to envision a life that blended their worlds, one that respected tradition and culture while allowing for growth and companionship. In the afternoon, they took a moment to rest near the river, the cool water flowing gently over smooth stones. The cowboy looked at the widow, noticing the way the sunlight played across her features, highlighting her strength and the quiet wisdom in her eyes. "We have been through much," he said softly. "And yet, here we are. I never thought I could feel this way again. But I do." The widow nodded, her expression serene. "I understand," she replied. "I have waited for honesty, for respect, and now that we have it, I believe we can face whatever comes next together." Their words were simple, yet filled with depth, acknowledging the journey they had shared and the future that awaited them. The evening brought a gentle breeze and a sky full of stars. They sat together outside her home, the fire crackling softly between them. The cowboy spoke of the lands he had traveled, the hardships he had faced, and the lessons he had learned. The widow shared stories of her past, not just of loss, but of resilience, of love, and of the courage it took to continue living fully after grief. Their conversation flowed easily, each story building a bridge of understanding and mutual respect. They laughed together, shared small confidences, and allowed themselves to be vulnerable in ways that had been impossible before. As the days turned into weeks, their bond continued to grow. The cowboy became a constant presence in her life, not as a visitor, but as a partner. He helped with daily chores, offered guidance when needed, and shared in the responsibilities of managing the land and animals. The widow, in turn, welcomed his presence, appreciating his help, his understanding, and the quiet companionship he provided. Together, they navigated challenges large and small, from unpredictable weather to the demands of the community, always relying on one another and growing stronger through cooperation and trust. Their relationship became a source of inspiration to those around them. Neighbors and friends began to notice the way they worked together, the respect and consideration they showed for each other, and the quiet strength of their bond. Though some still whispered about the unusual pairing of a widowed Apache woman and a lone cowboy, most came to admire the partnership that had formed. It was not a relationship built on passion alone, but on shared experiences, honesty, and a deep understanding of one another's character and values. One afternoon, as they walked along a familiar trail, the widow spoke of her dreams for the future. "I want to live a life where we both can be free," she said. "Free to make choices, free to care for our people, and free to face challenges together." The cowboy nodded, understanding the depth of her words. "And we will," he replied. "We will face everything together, with honesty, courage, and respect. I promise you that." They held each other's gaze, recognizing the truth in their words and the sincerity of their commitment. Time continued its steady march, and with it, the seasons changed. Spring brought new growth to the land, and with it, a renewed sense of hope and possibility. The cowboy and the widow worked together to plant crops, tend gardens, and ensure that the settlement thrived. Each day brought new challenges, but also opportunities to grow closer, to learn from one another, and to build a life rooted in mutual respect and care. They celebrated small victories together. Whether it was a successful harvest, a repaired fence, or simply a quiet evening by the fire, their connection deepened not only through shared work, but through understanding and emotional support. The cowboy learned to read the widow's subtle expressions, to anticipate her needs, and to offer comfort when necessary. She, in turn, learned to recognize his strengths, to appreciate his quiet acts of kindness, and to understand the depths of his character. Their relationship was a partnership in the truest sense, equal, respectful, and grounded in honesty. As the months passed, they faced moments of doubt and challenge, as all relationships do. There were times when disagreements arose, when the pressures of life seemed overwhelming, and when fear or uncertainty threatened to intrude. Yet, each time, they returned to the foundation they had built: honesty, respect, and shared experience. They learned to communicate openly, to listen carefully, and to support one another through difficulties. In doing so, they discovered that true partnership was not the absence of conflict, but the ability to navigate it together with patience and understanding. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant colors over the plains, the cowboy and the widow sat together on a hill overlooking the settlement. The world below was quiet, the animals settled for the night, and the air carried the faint scent of earth and growing crops. They reflected on the journey that had brought them together, the hardships they had faced, the challenges they had overcome, and the honesty that had transformed their relationship. In that moment, they felt a profound sense of gratitude, not only for one another, but for the lessons life had taught them. The widow reached out and took the cowboy's hand, holding it gently. "We have come far," she said softly, "and yet I feel we are only beginning." The cowboy squeezed her hand in return, feeling the warmth and strength of her grip. "Yes," he replied, "we are only beginning, and I am ready to walk this path with you, wherever it may lead." Their eyes met, and in that simple gesture, they acknowledged the depth of their bond, the honesty that had brought them here, and the shared future that awaited. Over time, their partnership became a model of trust, respect, and love for those around them. They demonstrated that connection was not simply about words or desire, but about shared responsibility, understanding, and care. Their story spread quietly through the settlement, inspiring others to value honesty, courage, and the strength found in partnership. The cowboy and the widow continued to face life together, navigating challenges with grace and resilience, always mindful of the foundation they had built and the trust that had brought them together. By the end of this chapter in their lives, they had not only discovered the truth about their feelings, but had also created a life shaped by respect, honesty, and shared purpose. The widow, once cautious and reserved, found companionship and understanding she had thought impossible. The cowboy, long accustomed to solitude, discovered the value of connection, trust, and the quiet power of shared life. Together, they forged a path that honored the past, embraced the present, and looked forward to the future with hope, courage, and a commitment to one another. Their journey was not marked by grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but by the small, meaningful actions that built a life of significance. They learned that love and companionship were as much about patience, respect, and understanding as they were about desire and emotion. Through honesty, shared challenges, and the courage to be vulnerable, they created a bond that would endure, a testament to the power of truth, connection, and the human spirit. And so, the lone cowboy and the Apache widow continued their lives together, not as two separate souls navigating a harsh world, but as partners walking a shared path. They faced each day with courage, supported each other in times of need, and celebrated the small joys that life offered. Their story was one of honesty, resilience, and the quiet beauty of connection. A story that proved that even in the midst of hardship, hearts could find one another, trust could be built, and life could be lived fully, with respect, care, and love.